Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. Are you having fun yet? Yeah? Yeah, that's not really the point. But good if you are. I think that whole idea of trying to tell the story of the resurrection as a prank on the devil, or even the idea of you're probably familiar with this, most good sermons start with a joke. Well, not always, but there's a thing about that. Did you know in the Middle Ages, it was not uncommon for the sermon to be just like full of like not just one joke, but lots of jokes, and some of them were not appropriate, if you know what I'm saying. And we know this is true because we have a record of clergy who wrote letters of complaint to their bishops about priests who were telling jokes in church. We don't actually have the original sermons or anything. We just have these letters that clearly show that there were a whole pile of clergy who were upset at some other clergy who were telling jokes in church, because that's not appropriate. It's a little bit like reading the letters of Paul, right? We don't have the information that came to Paul, but we can clearly see why Paul is writing to them. Except in this instance, there were clergy who clearly did not like it. And I bet those clergy were in churches that were mostly empty, and the clergies telling the jokes were mostly full. The thing is, I'm going to be absolutely clear that the whole point of this isn't about entertainment. Right? We've come to this point as churches now where we think we got to have bands, we got to have multimedia, we have to be entertaining. Otherwise, I won't have your attention. And our seats will be empty. The thing is, none of what I just said about the early church, like the story of this being Easter being a prank on the devil, or the idea that clergy would tell jokes in sermons, any of that stuff, that's not about entertainment. It's about engagement. There's a line. Truly, there is. You shouldn't be coming to church on a Sunday morning because, the minister does a good stand-up routine, or the band's good, or the PowerPoint's really good because it's all slides of cartoons by the naked pastor, who's called that not because he isn't wearing any clothes when he writes the cartoons, but because it's about naked faith, right? He found his faith in a very interesting way that's fascinating, and you should look into it. His name's David Hayward. It's not about entertainment. It's about engagement. It's about engagement with the story. And when we talk about humor, we don't just mean that you should be laughing out loud. We mean you should be seeing both the grief and the joy. That was the point of that video that you just watched from the Skit Guys, oddly enough. It's about finding joy in the story. And that's really important in this story because it's important to acknowledge that the very first characters in this story weren't happy at all. The way the story is told in Scripture, it didn't go like the video you watched where they found the clothes and they had a good laugh because they were happy because Jesus was alive. The way the story is told, every single character in the story is afraid. And no one believes that Jesus is alive until they see him. They all needed proof. The women who first come to the tomb are afraid that someone has taken the body away. They don't know where. They see an angel. An angel tells them stuff. They go and tell in some cases, they go and tell the other disciples, who of course don't believe them because they're women. It's the Bible. And even then, the disciples don't believe. They're hiding in a room because they don't believe. Except one of them. I'll come back to that in a second. But even when the women do see Jesus, and then they go and tell the others still don't believe. They just think they're crazy. Because that can't be. It's impossible. Which is a key point of the story, isn't it? Jesus is alive. It's about hope that things are possible. But then there's that part of the story where you have to ask, how is Jesus alive? And a few weeks back, we were talking about the Gospel of John and how important it is to remember the context of the Gospel of John and how the author was writing for a particular context, in particular, for people who were finding it hard to believe. They were being persecuted. Jesus had said he would be back again, and he wasn't yet. It was really getting really hard to bring people. It was also probably, people were probably finding that in the earliest days of the church, sitting still for an hour and a half or more and having to listen to someone talk at you is not the most exciting thing to do. You would think we would have learned that by now, but here you are sitting here listening to me talk. And the thing is, the story, the way we tell it then, has to have a character who doubts. So John writes this story about how Thomas doubted. And for 1,000 years, we keep talking about how Thomas doubted. We gave him a name, Doubting Thomas. And that's how we've always treated Thomas. Not all of us, actually. There is a church tradition that says Thomas was the first one to go and preach, and he went to India and all of this. There's a whole story there. But you can see how John would have thought, hey, what if I created a story where there's a character who doubts? I'm not suggesting the story isn't true. I am suggesting that it might not necessarily have happened that way. And I'm suggesting that because I'm about to retell you the story. But you can see why you would think that. It'd be really great if we had a single character who was an example. Because clearly no one got the point that none of the characters in the story believed initially until they saw Jesus, and that a whole point of those, blessed are those who will believe without having to see without having to believe, see and believe. You see how we connect those things. So here's a story where there's a character, a single character, who's an example for everyone. Coincidentally, it also happens to be the character who elsewhere in the Gospel of John is the one who asks questions about the way. Remember? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Remember that story? And how Jesus says, you guys know the way? And one of the disciples says, we don't know the way. How could we possibly know? That was Thomas. Remember earlier in the Gospel of John where Jesus says he has to go to a place where he's not going to be welcome? And the disciples are all like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. And one of the disciples goes, okay, let's do this. That's Thomas too. So the character the author of John picks to be this doubting Thomas person is the same one who asks questions but is also brave enough to do what needs to be done. So let me tell you a story. The women find that the grave is empty. The tomb's empty. They go to the disciples and they tell the disciples, the tomb's empty. either the body's gone or Jesus is alive. We're not really sure. We're really kind of confused right now. But Mary says she saw Jesus, and so we're just like really wondering what's going on. And the disciples go, "Oh, nice try. We saw him die. Nice try, though." No, the tomb is empty. The tomb is empty. Well, clearly someone's taken the body then. Let's go and look. And so 2 of the disciples go and look. And they find that indeed the tomb is empty. And then they go back and they tell the other disciples that the tomb is empty. And the other disciples all go, "Oh no, someone's clearly taken the body because Jesus couldn't possibly be alive. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And so they hide because they're afraid. One of them doesn't. Because while they're having this conversation about, I wonder what happened, one of them is thinking to himself, I don't know what's going on here, but I do know one thing for sure. I should be doing what Jesus said to do. And off he goes, and he does that. And then Jesus appears to the disciples in this locked room. And the first thing that Jesus says is, "Boo!" I don't think he said, "Peace to you," at all. I think he probably intentionally scared the bejeebers out of them. And then he said, "What are you doing here? Why are you afraid? Did you not listen to me? I said, I'm alive in you. Go and teach people. Share the story. Share the good news with people. Why are you here?" The disciples understandably freaked out because here's Jesus. But then they thought, okay, we believe now. And Jesus looked around the room, and he sees there's only 11 of them. He says, where's 1, 2, 3, 4. Where's Thomas? Where's Thomas? Well, we don't know. He's somewhere. Thought Jesus. And poof, he was gone again. The disciples then decided to actually leave their room. They still weren't really sure about stuff because, that's the way they've been all through the book, the story. But they run into Thomas because Thomas is coming back because Thomas says, "Hey, I ran out of pamphlets. I've been handing out stuff to people. I've been telling people about Jesus. I ran out. I'm just going to get some more." And they go, "Wait, Thomas, Jesus is alive. We've seen him." And Thomas goes, "No, you're pranking me. No, we've seen him. We've seen him, Thomas. Jesus is alive." No. I think you guys, clearly you didn't understand. What Jesus meant was he's alive in us and we should go and teach everyone. No, we've actually seen him. No. And so he goes and he gets more pamphlets and then he goes out again. And then he comes back and they're all together again because he ran out of pamphlets again. And they're all together again and there's Jesus. Boo! He's back again. A couple of disciples go, "Yeah, that was funny the first time, Jesus, but it's old now." But then he sees Thomas is there, and Jesus says to Thomas, "So, where you been?" "Well, I've been out doing what you said we should do." "I'm freaking out right now, Jesus, because I didn't expect to actually see you in person. But I have been telling people how you're alive in all of us." Jesus kind of nods and goes, Good job. Listen, I'm just going to say something for these guys because they didn't get it. Clearly, you saw and have been doing it. They needed to see me in order for them to go and do it. So listen, I'm just going to say this bit." And then he says, loud enough for the other disciples to hear, "Blessed are those who do not need to see in order to believe." Now all the other disciples feel really good about themselves. That darn Thomas, he wasn't here. He didn't believe. A little bit later on, Thomas gets a moment with Jesus by themselves. And Thomas says to Jesus, "So, I don't get it. What's the point here? Like, I got what you were teaching, and I was sharing that with everybody. These guys didn't. Like, well, here's the thing, Thomas. I had to show these guys, because clearly they didn't, and make the point once again, just like I did all through my life, that God's alive in you. Share that with the world. Everything that I've taught you is about how God is alive in you. So go and share that with the world. But now I'm labeled with the one who didn't believe, because people are going to think I doubted you. And Jesus goes, no, they'll realize it wasn't me that you were doubting. It was the other disciples who didn't believe that you were doubting. That's okay. It's okay to have that kind of doubt where you can question others because you know they didn't get it in the first place. Now, I'm going to go again. So, I'll do a really big theatrical thing with, ascending into heaven and stuff. It'll be fun. You'll love it. And people will love the story, too. It'll be great. Be really good in a movie someday. The point isn't for any of that to be funny so much as joyful, because Thomas knew right from the start. He knew what was true, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Because he's the one who asked the question about the way, the truth, and the life. And the way is Jesus, because the way is true and life-giving. It's the way that's important. Thomas got that right from the start. Maybe the others didn't. Maybe they needed more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because maybe we need more. Maybe we need a band. Maybe we need more media. Maybe we need more ways of engaging in order to connect with people. Because we can't all be as certain and as brave as Thomas, right? Yeah, we probably can. We probably can. Which is, I think, more the point of the story. We are so prone to the negativity of, this isn't good, it needs to be this. Instead of, why can't it just be this? Why can't the story just be that Thomas was out doing what needed to be done, and he was an example to the other disciples? I think that's how the story goes. I think Thomas is a great example for all of us. Not only did he understand, he knew what the job was. Go and live Jesus into the world. That's how Jesus is alive in you. So he was out doing that. But he was also out doing that at a time when he would have been constantly running into people who would be saying things like, you mean that guy we put on a cross last week? Yeah, that guy? Sure, whatever. He'd be running into all of that. And yet, he still was out doing it. I'm sure we could come up with other explanations of where Thomas was. He could have gone for milk. He could have been sleeping it off somewhere. He could have been visiting his grandmother. I don't know. There's probably 1,000 stories we could tell there. But wouldn't you most want to hear the story about how Jesus was alive in someone, and that someone was out sharing that life with others? Wouldn't that have the most positive effect? Not a story that says, don't do that. You should believe. You shouldn't need to see. You should just believe me. I'm being one of the disciples, aren't I? Which is the point. Thomas just didn't believe the other disciples. He didn't doubt Jesus for a second. He didn't doubt God either. So, What a great way to kick off the season of Easter. And so my colleague, Reverend Deanna Cox in Kilman Daysland, had a great idea for this season, and that is that we do exactly that each week we should talk about somebody who exemplifies Jesus in the world. And not necessarily great figures from history, not necessarily figures from the Bible. Thomas is a great place to start, I think. But not necessarily somebody who's a celebrity, who's famous. But somebody who just lives it every day. And so we're going to do that. Each week we're going to talk about somebody, someone you will probably not know, you might, but we're going to share a story about someone and connect them to the Easter story. People who are living the Easter story is the idea. Just like Thomas was.